mature Christians are peacemakers. War is a fact of life. There are 3 wars going on in the world. All of us, among all of us. 1, we are at war with each other. At war with each other. And this was in James 1 and 11 and 12. And we find some occurrences of issues of people at war with one another in 4 of the biblical churches that letters go to. The Holy Spirit does not waste time. If a letter to one of the churches addressed an issue, it was because that issue was going on in the church. So we can trust that that's what was happening. He didn't waste time telling them something they already knew. Or already were doing. So whenever we see something in one of the epistles addressing the church, it's because they needed to hear it. So in Corinth, they were taking each other to court. He said, don't take each other to court. You're going to be judges in heaven. You can judge each other among yourselves. Let Christians be the ones, he tells them. In Galatia, he said they were known to bite and devour. Bite and devour. I don't think they were cannibals, but I think their way of treating each other instead of loving each other was against not good. And he says, you will keep on doing that. It's like you're biting and devouring each other and you'll all be consumed. So don't do it. In Ephesus, there was a lack of spiritual unity. Unity is that blank. There was a lack of spiritual unity. I can't stay afterwards. I needed to say that too because I'm playing at the funeral. So I'll be getting out of here pretty quick after we finish. But normally my handout is available if you want to look at it for the answers, but you can just copy your neighbor. In this case, it's okay. In Philippi, there were 2 women, Euodia and Syntyche, that were not treating each other well. They had worked together previously and even with Paul. How awful that they couldn't settle it so much that in a letter to the whole church, he had to encourage them to fix your problem. Stop being at odds. And that's why no one names their children after them. Also, because their names are Euodia and Syntyche. So I'm just saying. All right, we started on the next section. There are several kinds of disagreements among believers that are addressed in the book of James. Specifically in James, there are several issues addressed that would fall under the category of at war with each other. The first is class wars. Class wars. Now, this is not sophomores against seniors. This is rich. The rich were honored and noticed, and the poor were disgraced and ignored. And remember, James began the book talking about encourage them not to show partiality, to favor the rich. He even said it's the rich that are taking you to court. It's the rich that are abusing you. And yet, when they walk in, you want to, be all over that because they're rich. And that was a kind of a class war going on in the church where James was writing. Another kind is he talks about in chapter 5, we'll get into in the next few weeks or months, you never know. Employment wars. Poor laborers were being mistreated and underpaid by their rich bosses. And so much so and they might have both been in the church. And James addresses that in chapter 5. Employment, I called it. The next one is church wars. And this is what he's talked about just in the previous chapter. We talked about the false wisdom. That selfish ambition and bitter jealousy leads to, they were showing that. They were having selfish ambition. As a result, they were not having a harvest of peace. They was causing disorder. Remember? That's what they said. Where there's bitter jealousy and selfish ambition, there will be disorder and every kind of vile thing. And that's what was happening, and that's why that had to be addressed. And finally, in chapter 4, talking here where where we are right now, personal wars, speaking against and judging each other. Personal wars. In verses 11 and 12, he says, "Do not speak evil against one another, brothers. The one who speaks against a brother or judges his brother speaks evil against the law and judges the law. But if you judge the law, you are not a doer of the law, but a judge. There is only one lawgiver and judge, he who is able to save and to destroy. But who are you to judge your neighbor? And so this is what we're talking about, this last type of war. This way they're speaking against one another and judging one another. This is the wrong use of the tongue. You see, this chapter followed that whole chapter that was all mostly about the tongue and wisdom. And this follows that. It's the wrong use of the tongue. Why? Because, or for we are to speak the truth in love. Speak the truth in love. In verse 15 of this chapter of Ephesians 4, it says, rather, speaking the word in truth, the truth in love, we are to grow up in every way into him who is the head, into Christ. We need to learn to speak to one another in love. Still the truth, but in love. This is that mixture of love and of grace and truth. See, it's important. God's grace is so valuable, and he's given it to us, and we need to extend it to others. But it isn't at the cost of truth. We can speak the truth with grace, or speak the truth in love. That's how we need to be dealing with one another. And one whole handout is just on this topic. We'll be seeing in just a couple minutes. If the truth is harmful, now I don't mean sinful, but if the truth hurts somebody, oh well, it's a truth, I have to say it anyway. No, you don't. Cover it. We are to cover it in love and not repeat it. Just because something's true about someone, it doesn't mean it's good to tell people it. Or even to say something about, if it's not sin, it might just be something, and it's true, but it could harm them. And we'll talk more about that again in the special handout. If the truth is harmful, we are to cover it in love and not repeat it. 1 Peter 4:8. Above all, keep loving one another earnestly. Some versions say sincerely, since love covers a multitude of sins. We put up with things if we love people. I see your husbands. I know you do. We love, I've seen some of your children. Love covers a multitude of sins. Or your puppies. How many things, if we love someone, we put up with. And what he's saying is, the truth is, if you really love each other earnestly, you will let love cover some things and let it go. And finally, though, if there is sin, we are to go to them personally, not to others. More about that in a moment. If there is sin, we are to go to them, the one in sin, personally. Matthew 18, if your brother sins against you, go and tell him his fault between you and him. What's that next word? Alone. If he listens to you, you have gained your brother. Now, I want you to go to this handout. This is an interactive handout you're going to have to fold. So I'm going to teach you how to fold it the right way, so it ends up correct. Your first fold is a half fold. You're going to fold the words in on themselves. Fold the words in on themselves. Well, that's really hard to read. So fold that like that. And then you're going to take each of the outsides and fold it back like that, so all the words are on the same side. It's not really a hard fold. It's not origami. It's folding a paper in fourths. It's accordion. So then we start here where it says, I feel that someone has something against me. And then we're going to just flip right through it. That's how it works. All right? And it's bookmark size, in case you need to keep it in your Bible to refer to. Your other handout is just a bunch of verses that are noted on here. So this is the study guide, or the verse guide that goes with this. I could have just read them, but I find many of us are audio and many of us are visual learners, and some of us are mixed. And that means if we see the verse, as we read it and hear it, we will understand it better. Some, believe it or not, if you're not one of these people, you may not understand. That's correct. Some of you, if we just read it, it's very hard for you to take it in if you don't see it. So, and if you're an audio learner, seeing it only helps you. It doesn't hinder you. Okay. So we're going to go through this, and each of these squares or rectangles are going to show us some things we could encounter. I'm not saying this is, you have encountered this. Which one do you need?
I need 2 of them.
2 of them?
Yes. Thank you.
Yeah. These are, you kind of go down this in order, and you'll see it. We'll tell you to skip parts. It's step by step. On what it's about is relationships and peacemaking between believers. Okay? And some of us don't know this. Years ago, about 10 years, maybe even 20 years ago, when I really realized this was an important truth, I felt bad I hadn't taught it more. How to deal with conflict, misunderstandings, accusations among believers within a church. Number 1, someone's phone's ringing. Okay. Number 1, I feel that someone has something against me. Maybe you're in a spot where you feel like, well, I think that person has something against me. Matthew 5 addresses that. So if you are offering your gift at the altar and there remember that your brother has something against you, this is a believer, leave your gift there before the altar and go. First be reconciled to your brother and then come and offer your gift. How important is reconciliation to God that he says, before you give your gift to me, work it out. So in this case, it says, you remember your brother has something against you. Okay, here's what to do. 1, if there's sin involved, confess. Confess the sin or offense and ask forgiveness. Maybe you go to this brother and say, I can tell there's something not right between us, brother or sister, and they tell you what it is. At that point, you may have offended them, so you'd have to ask forgiveness. Or you may say, I didn't do that, or it's a misunderstanding. You can work that out too. Be careful of getting defensive. Because often our first reaction when we hear that someone thinks we offended them and we didn't know we did is, well, I didn't do that. We have to also be careful we don't say, I'm sorry you were offended, because you're now apologizing for what they did. And you can't do that. There's a good way to ask forgiveness, and it's not, will you forgive me for what you did? Because they figure that out. So in that case, I'm sorry, I did not intend to offend you, and I'm very sorry that what I did offend you. Will you forgive me? And then you confess it and ask forgiveness. If you hear it and you go, yeah, I need to ask God forgiveness, do that too. But then consider it resolved. Don't go away from that situation saying, they're so easily offended. I didn't do anything. I know I asked them because I'm supposed to, but... And guess what? We hold it against them. Be very, very careful we don't do that. And we consider it resolved. So there's nothing else between us then. Good. God bless. And we can go back and finish whatever we're doing in our relationship with the Lord. That's what that's talking about when it says bringing your offering.
And no buts.
Pardon?
No buts.
Yeah. Get assurance from them that there is no offense, and go on at peace and talk about it to no one. That's a hard part. They thought I offended them. I asked forgiveness, and we're okay now, but thin skin. We have to be careful of what we say afterwards that adds sin Even if we didn't have sin, the response could have sin. We need to be very careful. What if I am being the one asked about an offense? So someone comes to me and says, I feel like I've offended you. Is there something wrong between us? One, if there is nothing, I must live like there is nothing. If I'm going to tell them when they say, I feel like there's something between us, have I offended you? And if I'm going to say to them, no, there's nothing between us. There's nothing wrong. I haven't had any offense. Then I need to be living as if there's no offense. Apparently something has made them think I have an offense. And maybe we'll have to, in that conversation, say, I really don't. What did I do that made you feel that way? Because I want to make sure I don't keep doing it. But if there is an offense, okay, first off, if there is nothing, I must live like there is nothing. Not just say, well, they're going to be so, worried about how I feel about them, or whatever the thing is. We want to make sure we don't carry that. If I'm not offended, then live like you're not offended and talk about it to no one. What did I repeat that? Is that copy? No, it goes there too. Okay, now, next box. That was someone has something against me. This one is I feel that someone has sinned against me. Now, this isn't just that something's bothered them and there's something between us. This is, I think that they've sinned against me. Number one, prayerfully determine if it is a sin. Now, if you go to the second underlined column, let's see what this map says here. Second underlined item in next column, if you feel it, if you determine it is a sin, you go to the next column, we'll come up to that, where it says, if I'm sure it is a sin. You see that? You can skip the rest if you're sure it's a sin. Go back to the first side. Or is it just an irritation or difference of opinion? Of opinion. Okay, let me just clarify this. I hope this isn't as confusing as it feels right now, but it's designed so that when you realize this was really a sin, they really did sin against me, then you just skip this and go to that column. That's what that other spot. But it could be they're just irritating to you. And it could be you just have a difference of opinion. If two people always agree, one of them isn't necessary. You will not always agree with even your best friend. You may disagree with your best friend a lot. So sometimes it's just a difference of opinion. Let's see what Colossians 3, and I should have changed that to 12 and 13. Sorry, maybe I'll give you a new one next week with any corrections we have here. Colossians 3, 12 and 13. You understand I'm going to this verse page then to read the verse. Yes?
What would we consider a sin? I mean, I don't understand that, like you said.
Someone could sin against you by telling a lie about you. They could steal from you. They could murder you, but it's really hard to... They could gossip about you. This is not a place to get ideas for how to mistreat people. Oh, I didn't know I could do that. But sometimes, and more often I think than sin, true sin, it's just that something they do irritates you or you don't agree with them. So let's look at Colossians 3, 12 and 13. Put on then as God's chosen ones, holy and beloved, compassionate hearts, kindness, humility, meekness, and patience, bearing with one another, and if one has a complaint against another, forgiving each other. As the Lord has forgiven you, so you must also must forgive. What's interesting here is it says, you're going along, bearing with one another, and here's the exception. If one has a complaint against another, what do we get to do? Forgive. Because Christ forgave you. So usually we're going to decide to let love cover and forgive it. Usually it's probably just a difference of opinion. How can they think that? That must be sin. you better check out, make sure it's sin before you treat it like sin, because it might just be disagreement. Decide to forgive and not hold it against them. Usually we apply this verse where it says, they have a complaint, I forgive them. And I decide to forgive. It's a decision to forgive. It isn't a feeling. It isn't because they deserve it. If you deserve forgiveness, you don't need it. Forgiveness is always undeserved. That's why you forgive someone, because they can't fix it. Remember, and never forget both. Remember and never forget. So it's a lot. We forgive because Christ forgave us. That reason never changes. If we say we forgive because we'll feel better about it, then if I don't feel better, I guess I don't have to forgive. If we forgive because, oh, they're really sorry, then if they're not sorry, we don't have to forgive. See, the only thing that always remains true is we forgive because Christ forgave us. So it really has nothing to do with how they feel. It has nothing to do with them asking. It has to do with Christ forgiving us. That's the constant. So usually we decide to forgive them, and guess what? There's that line again, and talk about it to no one. They offended me, they disagree with me, but I'm going to forgive. I'm going to forgive, and I'm not going to talk about them to anyone else. I'm just going to I love them. My roommate in Indonesia, I've mentioned before that her family wondered how anyone lived with her as long as I did. But she had things she thought should be this, and everybody should know they should be this. And one of those was the water bottles should be in the refrigerator. And you should never, because we had to filter our water, and we kept it in the large, we'd buy occasionally the large bottles, then we refill them and we keep them, and she wanted them in order, the one that's almost empty first, and never go to the next one until that one's empty. And so they have, and then I know the coldest one is the one right next to the lowest one, and then so on. Always, if you're putting a new bottle of water, it has to go on the end. Now, I don't care that much, but she cared. She cared. And there were times when she would get wasn't me, I'm sure, but the helper, somebody put it in a different order. She's like, those are supposed to be in this order. I also got up before her, and it was still dark, and I would open the back door so that our helper could come in. And it was still dark, so I left the porch light on and didn't think about it because we had the porch light on at night, right? Then I would go to my room and have my Bible study and my devotionals, and she would get up half an hour or so later. And one day she said, "Why don't you turn off the porch light?" I go, "What?" She says, "Every morning I have to come in. It's daylight and the porch light's on. Why don't you turn it off when you open the door?" And I said, "Well, I will now. I'm sorry, I didn't know it bothered you." Well, later she said it was some of the, what the Lord said to me, what he said is, "Do you love Kelly enough to turn off the porch light when you don't really care? But do you love Kelly enough?" I did love Kelly enough. You see, it's love that covers our offenses. And it was love, and that's what the Lord would tell me. He wouldn't say, "Yeah, you're right." He wouldn't say, "It's not fair doing it anyway." He would say, "Do you love Kelly enough?" Yes.
I remember reading the First Corinthians 13, and I read it every day. And then I decided to read a different version, and I came to love doesn't even notice when someone does it wrong. And I said, "Oh Lord, I noticed yesterday." I really had to work on that, not to even notice.
You see, even if when we notice we forgive them, we're still noticing. So we have more further to go in our love. But let love be that. It's love that covers. It isn't willpower. Now I will let that one go too. It's love. It's love. Let me give you number 2, and then we'll stop there. We'll have to continue this. Handle it humbly and carefully and fearfully in love. Usually we decide to let love cover it, talk about it to no one, and then handle it humbly and carefully, dealing with them or addressing the irritation or the difference of opinion. You can talk about it, but do it fearfully and humbly in love for the good of the relationship between you. For the good of the relationship. Yeah, I should have given it to you then. I told you I wished I taught it more. Yes.
Well, I had a situation like that in the past week, and listening to my Christian radio station really pricked my heart because it made me realize that the person who offended me needed love rather than,
Criticism.
okay, I was hurt, but this person needed my love more than anything.
And praise the Lord, it's someone you did love. So I have to go as quick as I can, so I'm going to close there. But Irene, real quick.
Just going to say two real quick things. One of the churches I went to, before communion, they gave us a moment to go and make things right with any brother or sister. That was the girls, I think. And then, I forgot the other Sunday.
It's an interesting idea if people are trained in it, because you're also seeing who has offense between each other, and so if they're trained in the right way to handle and they're not talking. Notice the next step on that was not talk about it to anyone. You're going to see this lots of times.
I was going to say it's countercultural.
It's what?
Countercultural.